digital sampling of a waveform and digital recreation. Now, this goes back to Johnny Nyquist. I don't know what his first name is, probably Olaf with a last name like Nyquist. But let's say we're recreating a sine wave or a sinusoidal wave of sorts. He said you have to have at least slightly more than 2 samples per cycle if you want to be able to recreate it with any kind of accuracy. So your sampling rate has to be twice the waveform that you're sampling, period. Because then you generally know where the high is and you generally know where the low is, and we can generally figure out what our samples is or what our sample rate is. But it's going to recreate that like as best it can. If it just draws a straight line between one point and another point, that's direct. However, if we take math and try to extrapolate what's going on between those points, like for example, if we know we're trying to recreate a sine, we can use algorithms to sort of smooth out that saw wave looking thing into something that looks more like a sine. As you increase the sample rate, you're going to get more sample data of that wave, and then you don't have to use things like, Bezier curves and things like that to recreate something that looks like a wave. We actually know what that wave is with more and more certainty. So for example, let's say we have a 500 megasample per second rate and we're sampling a 100 megahertz wave. Well, then we get, with each of our samples, 5 data points, and that's what we can recreate our wave with. Then our little microprocessor or whatever is going to try to use math, like I said, to figure out what that wave is and redraw it for you from just these dots that you have. We don't actually have waves, just dots. And as I had explained in the previous oscilloscope video, the more clever your firmware is and the more processing capability you have, the better you can predict what each of those waveforms is supposed to be, and the better you can redraw it for the user. Because otherwise we'd either just have a set of dots or a jagged mess. So let's use this as an opportunity to speculate on some of the trickery that's going on, or cleverness, whatever you want to say. Let's say you have an MCU that has an ADC on it. Then you have an MCU with several ADCs on it. Then you have an MCU with a separate ADC. Now, in the case of the first example on the top, you're pretty much limited to whatever sample rate the ADC is clocked at. In the second one, they may or may not have options to sync all of these various ADCs together, and I'll get to how you do that later on. But then in the third one, you're only limited by the speed that you can communicate between your ADC and your MCU. So let's make some assumptions. Let's assume that this is a clone of the chip that we think it is. Let's assume that they have it overclocked as much as they know it'll work from other examples, from Rigel, etc., at 125 megahertz per side, and we have 2 sides. Well, then we need to make some modifications in our system in order to get that to work. If you remember a few videos back, I made a segment on overclocking the, pill boards. Well, that's what this was leading to, or this is what that was leading to, I should say. Yeah, I planned ahead of time and spread this out over a couple different videos to sneak in the concepts and have some foreshadowing. Dave. I'm going to use that twice in this example. So once to show you right here that when you change your particular multipliers and divisors when you're setting up the clocks on your board, they all clock differently. And I'd mentioned in that video that you can very easily bork things like your USB, but you can also very easily overclock various different aspects, because not only do you have your main clock that clocks your GPO, but then you also have these other divisors and multipliers slaved off it that control the speed of the various buses, memory, SPI, all that stuff, and all the internal workings of the chip, which is going to control how quickly you can acquire and then process signals. And what I was doing was looking for 2 magic numbers to see if this was possible. Those magic numbers are 250 megahertz and 500 megahertz. Because as it sits right now, we have a microprocessor that's running at 168 megahertz. So if you're trying to shoehorn 125 plus 125 megahertz into there, you just can't do it. It's not physically going to happen. You're not going to have enough cycles to do that. But if we can hit 250 megahertz, then we can do that 125 plus that 125. And if we're doing that with direct memory access, that frees up all the other Johns in the background to be doing calculations while you're acquiring those samples. So that is theoretically possible if everything is perfect. And then we would need at least 500 megahertz in order to hit the 500 megasamples a second that they promise in the literature.
And as I showed in that video, you can overclock these pretty well. You can get a pretty big chunk of performance out of it as long as you don't get too much weirdness and jitter, overheating, which doesn't seem to be as big an issue, at least at these milder overclocks, and if you can get all of the divisors and multipliers right on the other clocks. Or another example of what you could do is to take your signal from your analog digital converter and then feed that into some kind of intermediate device to do some processing and chunk it out for your slower bus, and then feed it into your MCU. That processor that would chunk it out in a slower bus has to be incredibly fast, and we usually do that with an FPGA, or a field programmable gate array. I don't see one of those on here, so that ain't it. So let's take a look at what's 100% more likely here. So we have our analog signal, and then that's going to be two different signals because we're feeding into two different ADCs, and that's either differential or dual single-ended. That's going to go into ADC channel A, and then the other is going to go into ADC channel B. Now, each of those are 8 bits, and let's say they're sampling at 100 megasamples a second. That means we can take each of those channels, smoosh them together magically, and then we end up with our sample rate is doubled, because we can take each of the waveforms and offset them slightly accordance with the clock that both of the ADCs are synced to, and as long as that's good, we can get a good result. But that also means if it's bad, then it's not good. Not foreshadowing or anything. Now, you also have magical little math boxes you could put in the middle for like filtering and syncing and anti-aliasing and things like that I won't waste precious seconds of this video explaining, but I'll hit on them in the future. So if, according to that sync clock, if you go ahead and offset each of these by, well, if you unroll it to assign by phase, then you're able to recreate a higher resolution waveform. Or conversely, get twice the sample rate of the save waveform, thus allowing you to measure faster thingy-doos and who's and what's-its. Now, the number of times that you can increase this is just limited by like your clock and how clever you are. So you can take different samples along this sine phase and recreate those with just more and more parallel ADCs clocked to each other and offset by phase. So let's say we want to make a 1 gigahertz sample rate scope. Well, you could just use a single channel of a 1 gigahertz sample rate chip, or you could take 10 100 megasample chips and then just cascade them all together, clock them, offset them by phase, and then recreate a 1 gigasample, oh man, this is hard to say, gigasample a second rate. Because your gigasample converters might cost you like $1,000, but a single 100 megasample chip with like 8 or 10 channels or whatever might cost you like $100. Or an array of like dual 100 megasample chips might cost you like $5 a piece. But getting back to my crappy drawing of our multi-channel ADC that's all muxed together, the problem comes when you're trying to sync all of those and recreate your waveform. Because if you have jitter, or if you have some kind of clock problems or something like that, timing problems between samples, you're not going to recreate a perfect wave. And you might get something that before any type of correction just looks like kind of a squiggly garbagey mess. So ideally, we want our timing and that phase loop to be absolutely locked and to have even distribution of those samples so that we can recreate something good, and that then that doesn't drift or have any kind of jitter or nonsense. And not to give too much away, but we're slaving everything off of this guy, and we're dependent on this little crystal right here to oscillate properly, and then all of our timings to be synced up to each other through the MCU that's going to act as like the arbitrator and the sync clock for our ADC as well. So if we have any timing issues and jitter, uneven distribution of those samples, then we'll have problems recreating the proper waveform because of the jitter in the phase. And we're likely to lose bits here and there as well. Now, moving from the hardware to the software in a theoretical sense, now let's talk about those math magic boxes that I mentioned. You might have a waveform that looks like this, and you'll think, oh, is that ringing? Well, no, it's not ringing. You're running into phase problems, and you can use DSP correction, digital signal processing correction, to make that something that looks a little bit like more what we would expect to see. Words are hard, too much caffeine. Anyway, we know that our F400 series chip does have inbuilt FPU
and it has DSP on board. So presumably they're using that to some degree. I don't actually know without seeing the firmware. And it's going to be all up to the programmers as to how they apply that to the actual waveform that you're seeing.
And we can get a hint as to how well or how crappily the firmware is programmed and how well everything is synced up, depending on like how much wiggle, squiggle, jiggle we get in the waveforms.
All right. Back to our actual hardware at hand, though. Now, you can kind of put these pocket scopes into brackets. It's very nice that this scope actually does have a dedicated analog-digital converter at all. Whether or not we can trust the specs in the particular application and drift under temperature and things like that. Because a lot of the cheapier Cortex-based scopes, they just use the onboard analog-digital converters, which are obviously limited. For example, this DSO 138 that I showed in a previous video about trinamic steppers is basically like a glorified blue pill board with a screen and some kind of analog front end on it. So without any trickery or overclocking or anything like that, the F1 series, that gives us a 1 megasample per second ADC, and if you look a little bit further down, you see that the AD clock is just the AHB clock. There's no phase locking of any kind. However, let's go ahead and look at the F300 family that's right next to it here. We see that our max sampling rate is 5 megasamples per second. It's actually higher than that if you change the resolution, which we can do. It also has a phase lock loop clock, as well as differential mode for some of those inputs. And as an added bonus, it has onboard interleaving of some of those channels. So theoretically, we can take those 4 channels of ADC and F300 chip, go ahead and run those into each other, interleave them, but the problem is you end up running into the memory speed of these chips, which isn't meant exactly for this type of stuff, so they tend to butt into a wall and limit that to a lower rate. As we can see from these popular DSO 200 series scopes, they use the F303 chips and they limit the sampling rate to 10 megasamples a second using the interleaved internal DACs.
So what do we do about that memory brick wall? Well, here's where I'm just going to make some assumptions. I'm just going to say, what would I do if I were them and I were trying to meet these specs, either by doing something clever or something sneaky? Well, the sneaky thing would be to say, hey, our screen only has X number of frames that it can push per second, so we have that gap of processing time that we do in chunks instead of a real-time stream. So even if we have to slow things down a bit on the acquisition side, bringing in fewer bits, maybe we have a little bit of wiggle room, because we can still claim that it's acquiring those bits at that sampling frequency, but even if we can't process them, it doesn't matter because you couldn't see them in real time on the screen anyway. Now, obviously, we want a very fast wave refresh time and a very fast screen refresh time, and I'll get to that in future oscilloscope videos, but those of you in the know, you know what I'm talking about. So ideally, if we were trying to go as fast as possible, we would want to plug into the fastest bus we possibly could, and then we would be limited by our clock speed and our bandwidth, as well as the data structures that are available to pack all of these various bits of information into words that we can then process, presumably like through a buffer and then through DSP. And eventually we'd push that out to the screen. I would personally use the camera interface. I know it sounds strange, but I was looking through these data sheets and it seems like that's the fastest acquisition we possibly have, and it can do this type of parallel processing. So if we're spitting out this parallel signal from these two ADCs and trying to recombine them, there's no reason you can't get clever with the camera interface. I don't have a clue in the world how you would do that, but it just seemed reasonable. Which means we'd also have to overclock some of our other buses to compensate. Now, remember, we're the second down F407, which means we have a maximum SRAM frequency of 60, but I don't know if that's true on the GD32s. I know they handle things differently. If we assume that we take this and multiply it by the same ratio that we would need to overclock from 168 megahertz to 250 megahertz, then we're just shy of 100 megahertz with our SRAM frequency on this chip. But I believe with the GD32s, The first part of the prog.mem is actually run out of the SRAM, so it's very possible that's a lot faster. That's part of their, what did they call it in the literature? The, crazy program acceleration cache or something like that. Anyway, that's basically what it boils down to. So it's very possible that that's fine. Now, the other problem we have is if we're using the DCMI camera input, then our clock is 54 megahertz. So if we increase that by our overclock ratio, we're only getting around like 80 megahertz or so. So I'm not positive about that unless they're just kind of fudging it from there, in which case that would show up in abnormalities in square waves or non-repetitive waves above a certain frequency, and they might be able to just fudge sine waves. But that would have to be extrapolated over a larger sample size and then have DSP applied to it. But wait, we're not talking about an STM32, and those are the charts that I've been looking at. If we look at the Gigadevices datasheet, one of the things I do know about them ahead of time from working with the Blue Pill boards is that they offer more divisors and multipliers for the clocks. They also have their patent-pending zero-weight flash state, and they tend to run some of the peripheral buses at higher rates. Now, I regret that I do not have this exact chip to try this stuff out on, but because of all this nonsense, I may actually grab one and tinker around with it a little bit. So like I said, with that particular peripheral bus, with our STM32 chip, we were running at 54 megahertz, which means if we increase it by our, 1.42 or whatever it was, then we would be looking at around 80 some megahertz. But if you look right here, we have an 80 megahertz clock already. So what's to say we're not overclocking that by the 1.4 whatever? That means it would take us over 100 megahertz. Hey, combine that with if this whatever their zero weight flash read blah 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 thing is, and then I guess we do have enough processing bandwidth to suck in those and process them. It would also have another implication. They probably wouldn't be able to pull that off with the standard STM32 chips. So maybe this was designed and spec'd specifically around those Gigadevice chips. But the question is, how do they get that 500 megasamples a second? And I'm not really sure there. They'd have to pull some trickery and stretch the truth a little bit. As it is, we can see that they can barely, if everything is running absolutely perfectly, get that 250 megasamples a second. But that's just if everything is absolutely perfect and there's no drift or error anywhere. So yeah, that might be peak, but as far as like stable performance, it's probably a lot lower than that. And getting that all to work, getting it all processed, having all the devices work in sync and not drift too far out and be too jittery and make the waveform too wonkers on the screen, that all comes down to the firmware and how clever the firmware designers were. So that's all to say that with this particular scope, the hardware for better performance is there, but there's always a but, isn't there? It comes down to hardware or software performance, as in the firmware that's on there. And very unfortunately with this scope in particular, it is not open source. If it were, I could just take a look at the source code and answer a lot of these freaking questions without having to speculate at all. But regardless, it also means we're kind of stuck with whatever it is they want to foist upon us, which may be good, may be bad. We shall see as we go along in this review. Now, for scopes that presumably this may be based off of, there are firmware update procedures, so I thought, hey, maybe they built that into this. For example, the DSO Nanos, if you go ahead and boot it up while you're holding the down button, you can get into DFU mode and dump new firmware onto there. With other similar scopes, it's like you hold down the mode button, but I tried a couple different combinations and I just couldn't get it to work. But I didn't try all like 200 to 300 different variable combinations of press and hold and press and release 1 and 2 buttons as you boot up that are possible, so maybe there's a trick in there somewhere I just haven't found. And it also seems like they lock the stupid memory on the chip, so I can't get at it that way as well. Well, not easily.